on that day I made very Bengali food and served it in a Bengali fashion, arranged on the thali in a Bengali order. And Srila Prabhupada's sleeping room is where he respected. And so he sat behind his desk, and Pishima, we gave a small chunky. She sat it just directly opposite Srila Prabhupada on the floor. So as soon as I brought the thalis in and sat them down, Srila Prabhupada started making these little comical remarks about his sister. And he said, you know, she says it is water, I say it is fat. And I thought, my goodness, he's talking about her weight. You know, what's going on? And as soon as Prabhupada started kind of being light in his voice, Pishima kind of started chuckling. You know, she started kind of laughing on the side. And he said, all this. And he went like this. He was flapping his arm back. He said, this is fat, he said. But she calls it water. It's not so. And then he started teasing her. He started telling her about, oh goodness, the days when in their childhood they used to fly kites. And he said, I always used to beat her at kites, he said. And back and forth he was speaking very brother-sisterly about his little sister. So she was laughing, not understanding a word of all this. And in the course of all this kind of jesting, I was bringing the chapatis in, relays of chapatis. And when Srila Prabhupada finished his meal, I noticed that every katori, the little round bowls that all of the moist preparations are in and serving a thali, they were now piled one on top of the other, from the largest to the smallest, nearly 12 inches high, on top of his chunky. And when I walked in the room, he took his finger like this and he knocked down the whole stack. And he said, Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. And I said, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. And Pishima said, Gauranitai Ki Jai. And I said, oh, Srila Prabhupada, you ate everything. He said, now this was a speech that the two of us had with each other. Srila Prabhupada and I had signals for what the quality of the prasad was. Already now things had evolved much from the very early days. And if he patted his stomach, that meant it was third class. If he went like this, second class. If he went like this, first class. This meant excellent. So he said like that, excellent. And in this way, I remember very light, sweet, jovial, humorous first meeting with Pishima, where she didn't understand a word of what was going on, but she truly loved it. She was very, very fond of Srila Prabhupada, and from that day that I met her until very last that she was with Srila Prabhupada in 1976, I was also present in Vrindavan. She worshipped him. She just worshipped her brother. And he obviously was very, very fond of her.
Every day, Upendra and sometimes Bhakti Chua would cook Prabhupada's lunch, and they'd toil away in the kitchen for like 3 hours, making everything so nice. And then Upendra would bring the plate to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada would just wave it off, distribute. Sometimes I would distribute the plate. And Prabhupada, one time, he saw the devotees point, and I want this, I want that. Prabhupada said, mix it all together, they should not discriminate. So I mushed it all together, you know, sweets and vegetables and rice and everything, into a big mishmash. And then the devotees were like making faces, and you know, Prabhupada said you shouldn't discriminate if you know, here's the maha if you want it or not. And but every day, you know, Upendra was toiling to bring this plate, big plate, you know, huge plate, probably 16 inches across, round, and you know, 5 kinds of vegetables, fancy rice, you know, bitter melon, you know, lemon, ginger, make everything really nice, and Prabhupada just distribute. This went on for like a whole month, in about a month, the month of June. And near Jolly Kadasi came up, and I fasted all day, Upendra fasted all day, and it was like 110 degrees at that time. So the next morning I was just so weak. Even that day during the evening, I was just about ready to, my knees were going to buckle. I felt like, how can I continue this, but I thought, but somehow or another I did it. And so the next day when Upindra brought Prabhupada's plate and Prabhupada waved it off, Upindra just couldn't believe it. He said, Prabhupada, how is it? We're young boys, and if we fast for one day, we can hardly move. And here you are fasting for 30 days now. How do you do it? And Prabhupada said, I am living proof that the soul is not dependent on the body for subsistence, but rather the body is dependent on the soul. And so it's like, you know, so we were just overwhelmed with, even though Prabhupada was getting ready to leave the planet, he's still so Krishna conscious and free from bodily designation.
During Prabhupada's lecture, he basically stressed what he also stressed to me in a letter shortly after I took sannyas, which was to study the philosophy. He was very concerned that we understand the philosophy very thoroughly. And he said to me, do just like I'm doing. Just like sometimes I'm managing, sometimes I'm preaching, sometimes I'm cooking, sometimes cleaning, like that. Whatever needs to be done, that's sannyas. And it was very instructive because he was teaching yukta vairagya, that real renunciation is to do whatever is required for the service of Krishna, and not to maintain a false posture of being very aloof, as if one is only a preacher.
With Nagar Kirtan, with our congregational chanting, it was the joy of watching Srila Prabhupada pray to Krishna, because I think I explained a little earlier that when Srila Prabhupada first introduced the kirtans in our temple, first he sang. In the evening, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings, he sang Mangala Charana, alone. And we all were the rhythm section behind that. Our San Francisco was temple was a very musical place. We had so many instruments, and everyone played an instrument. Nobody sat in the temple. Everyone played something. It was a very reciprocal relationship with Srila Prabhupada. And he sat on his Vyasasan and he closed his eyes almost always when he sang this Mangalacharana, and he went very deep into prayer. And when he opened his eyes, gray slits moist, and he looked down at us, it was very often as if you felt as if Srila Prabhupada was looking right through you, seeing everything, seeing Krishna. So by simply observing him pray to Krishna, we got an idea of the depth of what prayer was, even in these early days. And then the kirtans were simply rock-out sessions. I mean, if one person stood, everyone stood. If another person danced, you danced, because we were all packed right in together. And they were very joyous, beautiful, joyous, long, languorous, sweet kirtans. So through that, japa was a very personal thing, and I don't remember a great deal of concentration or discussion between the devotees about japa. Mostly it was congregational chanting.
And the happiest time, I think, out of all the service I did for Prabhupada, the simplest thing made him the happiest. I was waiting for him to come up, and I took his Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto, Part 4, and I was sitting in front of his desk, and I was just reading it, waiting for him to come up. And so that night he came up a little earlier than I expected. And so they just carried him through the circular stairs in the back. You carry him in the rocking chair. It's a tight squeeze, so only 2 people can carry him up. And they carried him right in. And as soon as I saw him, I put the book on his desk and did my obeisances. And Prabhupada asked me, what are you reading? And I said, oh, it's your Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada, 4th Canto, Part 4. And he just smiled like anything. And Tamal Krishna was standing there, and he said, this is very good. He's reading in his spare time. This is very good. And so I was just like, wow, you know. I mean, he's out there in the hot sun, 110 degrees, spraying the windows and you know, doing all this service in the hot sun. He never said anything about that, but when he saw me reading, he was very pleased.